The morning after Lucas's revelation, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The weight of everything that had been said, the unspoken truths hanging in the air, made her chest feel tight with anticipation. Her mother, Eleanor, had always been the master of control, dictating every aspect of her life with ruthless precision. Yet, last night, Lucas had thrown everything into chaos. They weren't simply playing by the rules anymore. They were rewriting them. And for the first time in her life, Sophia wasn't just following orders. She was making her own decisions. As she stood in front of the mirror in the Montgomery mansion, her fingers tracing the delicate lace of the dress Eleanor had chosen for her, Sophia's reflection, stared back at her, almost a stranger. She looked every part the obedient daughter, polished, pristine, every detail of her appearance managed to perfection. But inside, she felt the stirrings of rebellion. It was a new sensation, one she had never allowed herself to feel before. The world around her had always been one of strict rules and cold expectations. Ever since she could remember, Eleanor had shaped her life like a clay statue, molding her into the ideal daughter, the perfect heiress to the family fortune. Every step was predetermined. How she would dress, whom she would marry, even how she would think. There was never room for her own desires or dreams, only the relentless pursuit of maintaining the Carter family's empire. Love, freedom, happiness. Those things had always been luxuries, distractions from the greater purpose of business and legacy. But last night, in a small moment of defiance, she had tasted something she had longed for: control. Sophia wasn't sure where it had come from. Perhaps it had been the way Lucas had looked at her, like she wasn't just another piece in their family's chess game, or the way he had confided in her about the dark secrets that bound him to his own family. For the first time, someone had spoken to her like she was more than just a pawn. They had shared their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, and in that moment, she had realized something profound. Lucas wasn't just trying to escape his family's expectations. He was actively fighting against them, the same way she had been for years. But now, as the weight of the Montgomery Empire loomed over them both, Sophia knew their rebellion was just beginning. She had agreed to Lucas's plan. They would play along with the marriage, but on their own terms. They would create a narrative of their own, one where they weren't helpless victims, but active players in the game. It was dangerous, reckless, but it was the only chance they had. Sophia's thoughts were interrupted as a soft knock echoed on the door. Her mother's voice, sharp and commanding, called from the other side. "Sophia, are you ready?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat, and she took one last look at herself in the mirror. She had no illusions about what this day would bring. It wasn't a celebration of love, but a cold, calculated transaction between two families. The wedding wasn't about her or Lucas. It was about the Montgomerys and the Carters securing their future. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the rising tide of anxiety in her chest. When she stepped into the hallway, Eleanor was already waiting at the foot of the stairs, her presence as commanding as ever. Her sharp eyes scanned her daughter's appearance, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "You look perfect," Eleanor said, her tone almost condescending. "You mustn't forget who you are, Sophia. This marriage is everything. It's the key to securing our future. You will play your part today." Sophia swallowed the bitter taste in her throat but managed a tight smile. "Of course, Mother." As they descended the stairs, Sophia's mind raced. Lucas had already made his move last night. He had taken control of the situation, challenging the very foundation of the arranged marriage that had been planned since before she could remember. But now, as they approached the Montgomery mansion, the reality of their situation sank in. They were surrounded by enemies in plain sight, family members who cared more about business deals than their happiness, and yet there was a flicker of hope within her, hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could change her fate. When they arrived at the Montgomery estate, the air felt thick with expectation. The sprawling mansion, with its marble floors and towering windows, seemed to suffocate her with its grandeur. This was her future, the gilded cage she had been destined to live in. The massive front doors opened with an almost deafening sound, revealing the family waiting inside. Margaret Montgomery was the first to greet them, her smile as fake as ever. She stepped forward, arms open in a warm yet rehearsed gesture. "Sophia, my dear, it's wonderful to finally have you here." "It's wonderful to finally have you here," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery," Sophia replied, forcing the words out. She could feel the weight of her mother's presence behind her, always watching, always judging. But for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to look past Margaret, her eyes scanning the room for the man who would be her future, Lucas. He stood across the room, the same calm expression on his face as always, his posture relaxed but somehow detached. He was still a stranger to her, and yet there was something in the way he carried himself. Something in the way he carried himself, something in the intensity of his gaze that told her he was playing his own game. He wasn't just going to accept this marriage. He was going to make it his own. "Ah, Sophia," Lucas said, his voice smooth and controlled as he walked toward her. He extended his hand, his grip firm but impersonal. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Sophia hesitated for only a moment before shaking his hand. His touch was cool, professional, but there was an unmistakable spark between them. She wasn't sure if it was just the tension of the moment or something deeper, something unspoken, but it was enough to make her pulse quicken. "The pleasure is mine," she said, her voice steady. But inside, her heart was racing. She wasn't sure what to think of Lucas. He had confessed his own secrets, and now she had her own to keep. But one thing was clear: the game had only just begun. As the evening unfolded, the conversation turned to the impending wedding, and Sophia found herself once again caught in a web of expectations and obligations. Her mother spoke of the marriage as if it were a business deal, discussing alliances, mergers, and the future of their families' empires. Mergers and the future of their families' empires. But as the words swirled around her, Sophia couldn't help but feel that everything was slipping through her fingers. The night wore on, and the pressure to conform weighed heavily on her. But in the quiet moments between conversations, when their eyes met, Lucas's gaze seemed to promise something more. He wasn't just a stranger in this game. He was an ally. Together, they would rewrite the rules. But first, they had to make their move, and Sophia had no idea where this game would take them. But she knew one thing for certain: it would be a fight for their freedom, and she was ready to take on whatever came their way. The following day was a blur of high society pleasantries and expectations as Sophia walked through the grand halls of the Montgomery mansion, her every move under scrutiny. The mansion, with its towering marble columns and delicate crystal chandeliers, felt like a gilded cage, a perfect reflection of the life that had been planned for her. But beneath the surface, the unease from last night still simmered. Sophia couldn't escape the feeling that Lucas had pulled the rug out from under her, setting the stage for something bigger than she could have imagined. And as she took her place at the dinner table, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Her mother, Eleanor, was in her element, commanding the room with her cold, calculating gaze, while Margaret Montgomery, Lucas's mother, beamed with practiced charm. Everything about this gathering felt rehearsed, like the opening scene of a play where everyone knew their lines, but no one was truly free to improvise. For a moment, Sophia felt like she was floating above it all, watching herself play a role she no longer recognized. The perfect daughter, the perfect heiress. Lucas, however, wasn't playing along in the same way. He sat across from her at the long, polished table, his sharp eyes never quite meeting hers, though they held a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was calculating, as though he were mentally deconstructing the entire dinner party, seeing through every smile, every handshake, every word. Lucas was different. He wasn't just following the script, and that realization both thrilled and terrified Sophia. The conversation drifted from business to social niceties, but Sophia couldn't focus on anything but Lucas. He had disrupted her life in ways she couldn't quite understand. And now, as the evening wore on, she began to feel the weight of the decision she had made the night before, when he had proposed that they rewrite the narrative of their marriage, create their own story rather than following the one their families had written for them. She hadn't realized just how much that would cost her. It was dangerous, reckless, and utterly thrilling. But it was also terrifying. What if their rebellion came at a price they couldn't afford? Suddenly, the conversation shifted. Robert Montgomery, the patriarch of the Montgomery family, cleared his throat, and the room grew quieter, as though everyone had been waiting for this moment. "Lucas," Robert began, his voice firm. "It's time we finalize the terms of this marriage. We've done the groundwork, and now it's time for our families to come together. This union will be the foundation of something bigger. This union will be the foundation of something bigger than either of us." Sophia's stomach twisted. She had heard these words too many times in her life. They weren't about love or partnership. They were about power, business, stability, everything her mother had ingrained in her since childhood. Eleanor had always insisted that emotions had no place in the business world. Love was a luxury, she would say, not a necessity. But Sophia was starting to realize that she wasn't willing to sacrifice her happiness for her mother's vision anymore. And neither, it seemed, was Lucas. Before she could respond, Lucas spoke, his voice cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. "Actually, I think we should talk about something more urgent." His words hung in the air, shifting the atmosphere in an instant. His father's gaze narrowed, and Margaret's smile faltered, just for a moment. Sophia couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. This was it. The moment when they would begin to take control. "I've been thinking about this marriage," Lucas continued, leaning back in his chair as if he were discussing a casual matter. "And I think it's important we set clear terms. I'm not willing to just sign on the dotted line without understanding exactly what this is going to mean for both of us." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. He was doing it. He was making the move she hadn't dared to make herself. He was taking the reins. Eleanor's expression tightened, and her eyes shot to Lucas, sharp as daggers. "What exactly are you suggesting, Lucas?" Her voice was calm, but there was a palpable edge to it. "I'm suggesting that we stop pretending this is just about two families coming together," Lucas replied, his tone steady and unwavering. "This isn't just a business deal. It's our future at stake here. And I want to make sure that we're both on the same page." Sophia could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a confrontation. Eleanor's eyes flicked to Sophia, her gaze icy. "What do you think, Sophia?" she asked, her tone dripping with forced sweetness. "Are you on the same page with your future husband?" Sophia's mind raced. She could feel the weight of her mother's gaze bearing down on her, but she couldn't bring herself to look away from Lucas. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a puppet on a string. She didn't feel like she was being controlled. Lucas's rebellion, his defiance against their family's plans, was giving her the courage she needed. "I agree with Lucas," she said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "We shouldn't just be going along with this because it's what our families expect. We need to decide what's best for us." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Montgomery's jaw clenched, and Margaret's smile became even tighter, as though she were holding back a tidal wave of emotion. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Sophia thought she saw a flicker of something. Perhaps. "You're both being unreasonable," Eleanor finally said, her voice cold and controlled. "This marriage is a business arrangement. It always has been. You will do as you're told, and you will marry Lucas Montgomery. That's the way this works, Sophia. I've worked too hard for this to let you ruin it now." But something inside Sophia snapped. She wasn't the scared little girl who had blindly obeyed her mother for years. She wasn't the woman who had lived her life in fear of her family's expectations. She was done being controlled. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I won't just do what I'm told anymore. I want more than this. I want more than this. I want a life that's mine to control." Lucas turned to look at her, his eyes dark and intense. He wasn't just playing a part either. He was on her side in this moment, in this game, and that gave her the strength she needed. Robert Montgomery looked between them, his expression unreadable. "What are you two playing at?" he asked, his voice low, almost dangerous. Lucas didn't hesitate. "We're playing to win," he said. "We're taking control of our future. We're not just following the script anymore. It's our turn to write it." Sophia could see the fury bubbling beneath the surface in her mother's eyes. Eleanor was no longer the mastermind pulling the strings. For the first time, she was on the outside, powerless to stop them. The evening continued in a haze of whispered arguments and veiled threats, but one thing was clear. Things had changed. The game had shifted. And Sophia knew that whatever happened next, she wasn't going to let anyone decide her fate for her again. The next few days were a whirlwind of tension and secrecy. After the dinner, where Lucas had laid the groundwork for their rebellion, Sophia felt as though she were living in two worlds. On the surface, everything appeared perfectly orchestrated. She was the dutiful daughter, dressed impeccably, answering questions politely, and sitting beside Lucas at every public event, like the perfect pair they were supposed to be. But beneath that polished exterior, a storm was brewing. Every conversation with Lucas, every shared glance, ignited something within her. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. For the first time, she wasn't just playing a role. She was taking control of her life, and with Lucas by her side, they were about to break free from the chains their families had forged. But breaking free was never going to be simple. Sophia could feel the walls closing in as the pressure from her mother escalated. Eleanor wasn't a woman who took disobedience lightly. Every time they met, whether in private or at a social event, there was an almost tangible hostility between them. Eleanor was watching her, waiting for any sign of weakness, any chink in her armor, and every time Sophia met her gaze, there was a coldness in her mother's eyes that made her heart skip a beat. She had always been the perfect daughter, the one who obeyed without question, but one who obeyed without question. But now, as the days passed, she realized just how far she had already drifted from that version of herself. Lucas, too, seemed to be walking a fine line. It was clear that he was playing a game far beyond their family's expectations, one that was as dangerous as it was thrilling. But every time their paths crossed, Sophia could sense the subtle shifts in his behavior. He was becoming more and more unpredictable. At times, he seemed determined to control every aspect of their rebellion, but at other moments, he pulled back, as if uncertain whether he could trust Sophia fully. She couldn't blame him for that. Trust didn't come easily, not when you were both raised to manipulate and control. One evening, as the sun began to set, and the sprawling estate outside the Montgomery mansion, bathed in golden light, Sophia found herself standing at the balcony, gazing out into the distance. The weight of the world felt heavier with every passing day. The more she tried to break free, the more she felt like she was suffocating. The world was closing in around her. Her mother's expectations, the looming wedding, the family's financial and social pressures. But then, out of nowhere, Lucas appeared at her side, his presence as calming as it was unsettling. "Penny, for your thoughts," he asked, his voice low, the familiar calmness of it easing the tension in her chest. Sophia turned to face him, her gaze searching his. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending, Lucas. Every time I see my mother, I feel like I'm suffocating. She's watching me, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to fall in line. And yet, every time I try to break free, the walls just keep closing in. Lucas studied her for a long moment before answering. You won't be trapped forever, Sophia. We're already in this together. We just need to be careful. It's not just about us anymore. The families are watching. The stakes are too high. She nodded slowly, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I don't know if I can keep playing this game. It's not just about them anymore. It's about me, too. I'm losing myself in all of this. Lucas reached out, his hand brushing hers. The simple gesture sent a jolt of electricity through her. His touch was so steady, so assured, and it made her feel grounded in a way she hadn't in a long time. But there was something more in the way he held her gaze. It was more than just raillery. It was an unspoken promise, a vow that, no matter what happened, they would face it together. You won't lose yourself, Lucas said softly. You're stronger than you realize. We're in this for the long haul, Sophia. And when it's over, we'll have rewritten the rules. Our rules. She looked at him, her heart pounding. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed him. The hope she had pushed aside for so long began to rise within her again. Lucas wasn't just a partner in this fight. He was the ally she needed, the one person who understood what it meant to be caught in a game they didn't choose, but with the audacity to change it. I'm scared, Lucas, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah. Lucas took a step closer to her, his expression hardening. We won't fail. We won't fail. We'll fight for each other. And even if everything else falls apart, we'll have our freedom. But even as he said the words, Sophia felt the tension in the air thicken. The truth was, their rebellion was a dangerous game, one that could destroy not just their futures, but their families as well. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences. What if they lost everything? What if they became the very thing they had spent their lives fighting against? What if her mother's wrath was something neither of them could survive? That night, Sophia barely slept. Her mind raced with thoughts of Lucas, of the plans they had made, of the sacrifices they would have to make. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her chest, and every time she closed her eyes, the image of Eleanor's cold, calculating eyes haunted her thoughts. Sophia wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up this charade. There was a part of her that just wanted to break free, to escape from the suffocating world she had been born into. The next day, Lucas called her into the library, his voice terse over the phone. We need to talk. It's time to take the next step. When Sophia arrived, Lucas was already standing by the large window, looking out at the vast grounds that stretched out before them. His face was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture that spoke volumes. What's going on? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas turned to face her, his expression hardening. It's time we start making moves. We can't just sit back and wait for things to happen. We need to take control of our narrative, Sophia. We need to take the next step. Her heart raced. She had always known this moment would come, the moment when they had to act or risk losing everything. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we start making our own rules, Lucas said, his voice firm, resolute. It's not just about the marriage anymore. It's about taking back our lives. Sophia felt a spark of excitement and fear ignite within her. This was it, the moment they had been building toward. But as she looked at Lucas, she realized something. This wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about everything they had fought for, everything they had risked. This was their fight for freedom, and the only way they would win was by rewriting the rules, taking everything they had learned about manipulation, control, and power, and flipping it on its head. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady and filled with purpose. Lucas nodded, a glimmer of something dangerous in his eyes. And with that, they made their decision, one that would change everything. They were no longer just players in the game. They were the ones who would redefine the rules, for better or worse. The next few weeks felt like an intricate dance of deception and strategy. Every move Sophia made had to be calculated. She could feel the pressure mounting from both sides. Her mother's unwavering expectations, Lucas's quiet but persistent push to take control of their own future. Each day, it became clearer that they were stepping onto a path from which there would be no return. The plan was set in motion, but with every move, the stakes grew higher, and the risks more dangerous. Sophia had learned to wear her mask well, a perfected version of herself, the poised and obedient daughter her mother wanted her to be. Yet, underneath it all, there was a growing fire. Lucas had given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing, a sense of agency, a belief that she could fight for her own future, that she didn't have to simply accept the fate that had been handed to her. The rebellion had begun, but it was a slow burn, one that required careful planning, patience, and, most of all, secrecy. The first step in their plan had been subtle. They started planting seeds of doubt. Lucas, with his characteristic calm and strategic mind, had begun to speak out during family gatherings, questioning the terms of the marriage, offering suggestions on how they could reframe the union to make it more beneficial for both families. Sophia joined in, albeit cautiously, offering carefully worded statements that hinted at the potential for greater power, greater control, but never quite stating it outright. They needed to create just enough uncertainty in their families' minds without pushing them too far, too fast. At the same time, they began to form alliances with people who were disillusioned with the Montgomery and Carter families' way of doing business. They had to be careful. Too much too soon could bring everything crashing down. But the whispers of rebellion were growing louder, and both Lucas and Sophia knew it was only a matter of time before they would need to act. Their families, for all their wealth and power, were not invincible. And they, too, could be played. One evening, after another long day of pretending, Lucas called Sophia into his private study. There was something in his voice that told her this was different. This wasn't just another casual meeting. We're about to make a move that would change everything. "You're not going to like this," Lucas said, leaning back in his chair as Sophia stepped into the room. His gaze was intense, calculating. He looked different, more determined than she had seen him in days, and a part of her couldn't help but feel that something was about to break. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her stomach was tight, knowing that whatever this was, it was the next step, and there was no turning back now. Lucas took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "We're going to have to escalate things. The longer we wait, the more our families tighten their grip on us. The more we pretend, the harder it's going to be to break free. It's time to take the fight to them." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Lucas stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her as he gazed out over the estate. "We've been building up to this, but now we have to push harder. We need to take control of the narrative. Our narrative. If we wait any longer, we risk losing everything." He turned to face her, his expression hard, the weight of the decision hanging in the air between them. "The wedding is happening. We can't stop it, but what we can do is make sure it serves our purpose, not theirs." Sophia's pulse quickened. "And how do we do that?" Lucas smirked, his eyes glinting with a mixture of excitement and danger. "We create chaos. We stir the pot. We start by leaking information about the marriage, about the family secrets. We make them doubt everything they've worked for. We turn this whole thing into a battle, not just a business deal. We take control of our own story, Sophia. But it's going to get messy. Sophia's mind raced as she absorbed his words. Chaos. It was the only way to break free, to disrupt everything her mother and the Montgomerys had planned. But she also knew that chaos came with consequences. There was no guarantee they would walk away unscathed. "Are you sure we're ready for this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas walked over to her, his gaze softening for a moment, but the determination in his eyes was still there. "We have no choice. This is the only way out. We fight or we're trapped forever. And I'm not letting that happen." For a moment, Sophia stood frozen. The fear was there, of course. The fear of everything falling apart, of losing everything she had ever known. But then, as she looked at Lucas, she felt it. And she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He was right. This was the only way out. If they didn't fight now, they would never be free. She had to trust each. They had to trust each other. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady now, her resolve hardening. Lucas nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Let's get to work." And, just like that, they were committed. The plan was set in motion. Over the next few days, they moved in silence, planting rumors and revealing just enough to spark doubt among their families. It wasn't much, just whispers of dishonesty, of broken promises, of secrets that threatened to undo the careful facade the Montgomerys and the Carters had built over the years. It wasn't enough to bring everything crashing down, but it was enough to bring everything crashing down, but it was enough to start a chain reaction. The first cracks appeared in the walls of their family's control. But as the tension mounted, so did the danger. Sophia could feel her mother's gaze on her like a hawk, always watching, always waiting for her to slip up. Eleanor was no fool. She could sense that something was off. And yet, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She didn't know that the storm was already brewing. And by the time she realized it, it would be too late. The evening of the engagement party arrived. It was everything Sophia had feared and more. The perfect facade was on full display. Guests from both families mingling, talking business, discussing the future, all while Sophia and Lucas were at the center of it, playing their parts. But beneath the polished smiles and elegant dresses, the air was thick with tension. Sophia could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she stood beside Lucas. This wasn't just a celebration. It was the beginning of their war, the first move in a game that would decide their futures. As the night went on, the cracks began to show. A whisper here, a glance there. Tensions were rising, and it was clear that their families were beginning to question everything. Sophia's heart raced as she realized that the chaos they had set in motion was just beginning. The game was on, and there was no turning back. And yet, for the first time, she felt a sense of power. The fight for her freedom had begun, and she wasn't going to lose. The days following the engagement party were a blur of tension and subtle moves. Sophia could feel the weight of the entire world pressing down on her shoulders. The plan had begun to unfold, and she was no longer just a passive player in the game of family politics. She was actively reshaping her fate. Yet with every step forward, the risk of everything unraveling seemed to grow. The Montgomerys and the Carters, though once seemingly impenetrable, were beginning to show cracks. And it was in those cracks that Lucas and Sophia found their chance to break free. The tension between them and their families became palpable. Eleanor, who had always been the master of control, began to sense that things weren't as they seemed. Her cold, calculating gaze followed Sophia everywhere, and every word exchanged between them felt like an unspoken challenge. But Eleanor wasn't the only one who had started to feel the shift. Robert Montgomery, though a man of few words, was a force to be reckoned with. He had begun to notice that Lucas was questioning the very foundation of their plans, and that unsettled him more than Sophia could have imagined. The battle lines were being drawn, but it was still too early to tell which side would come out victorious. Lucas and Sophia had managed to keep up the facade, at least on the surface. They attended family dinners, business meetings, and social events, always together, always playing their parts. But beneath the surface, they were working in silence, carefully plotting their next move. They had learned quickly that in this game nothing could be rushed. Every move had to be precise. Every move had to be precise. Every word chosen carefully, and every secret shared only in the safest of places. They had no room for mistakes. Then, one afternoon, after another exhausting round of public appearances, Lucas pulled Sophia aside. There was something in his eyes. A hint of urgency, a fire she hadn't seen before. The time for subtlety was over. "We need to act, and we need to act now," he said, his voice low, but the intensity in his gaze made it clear that this wasn't just another casual conversation. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for, the moment they had been preparing for, the moment they would make their boldest move yet. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had seen this side of Lucas before, the side that was determined, relentless, and ready to push the boundaries of everything they had been taught to believe. She had learned to trust him, to follow his lead, but now the stakes were higher than ever before. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice steady, though her pulse was quickening. Lucas walked over to the window, his back turned as he looked out at the sprawling grounds of the Montgomery estate. "We need to destroy the illusion," he said. His words deliberate. "The wedding, the families, all of it. It's just smoke and mirrors. We can't keep playing along. We have to bring down the house." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying we should expose everything?" Lucas turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Yes. The secrets, the lies, the manipulation, it's all connected. If we expose just enough, if we reveal the truth about the families, about the deals, the power plays, we can turn this all upside down. And when everything crumbles, we walk away free." Sophia stared at him, her mind racing. The plan had always been about rewriting their own story, but this was something else. Exposing the families meant risking everything. It meant they would be seen as traitors, enemies of the people who had raised them, who had given them everything. It was the ultimate gamble. "Do you realize what we're talking about?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We could lose everything. Our names, our reputations. Our families will never forgive us." "I'm not asking you to do this lightly," Lucas said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I'm asking you to take control of your own destiny. We've already sacrificed so much, and if we keep waiting for the perfect moment, it will never come. This is the only way." Sophia's mind was in turmoil, but one thing was clear. Lucas was right. They were at a crossroads. If they backed down now, they would be trapped forever. If they went through with this, there would be no turning back. But in that moment, as she looked at him, she saw the same fire in his eyes that she had seen when they first began this journey. She saw someone who was ready to burn everything down, not just for himself, but for them both. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, the decision final. "We do it. We tear it all down." Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good. Now we start. It's time to make our move." Over the next few days, they moved in the shadows, gathering information, making secret alliances, and planting the seeds that would eventually grow into the perfect storm. They reached out to individuals within their families who were dissatisfied with the status quo, people who had their own reasons for wanting to bring down the empire. It was a delicate operation, one wrong move, One slip, up, and everything could come crashing down. But as the days passed, the web they wove became more intricate, more complex, and more dangerous. The first step was subtle. A few whispered words here, a carefully timed leak there. A rumor about the origins of the family fortune, about the shady deals that had been made over the years, about the manipulation of people who had no idea they were being used. These were the cracks they needed to widen. The goal wasn't to bring the whole empire down at once. It was to create doubt, to make the people around them question everything they had been told. And it worked. Slowly but surely, the whispers began to spread, and the Montgomerys and Carters could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. But then, things started to escalate. Eleanor, ever the calculating strategist, began to sense something was wrong. Her sharp instincts had always been one of her greatest assets, and she wasn't one to miss a shift in the air. She started questioning Sophia more directly, asking her pointed questions about her involvement in the recent rumors. Sophia did her best to maintain her composure, to play the role of the dutiful daughter. But the tension was undeniable. Eleanor was closing in. And then, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. During a high-profile gala, where both families were expected to make a grand announcement about the wedding and future business ventures, everything fell apart. Lucas made his move, but not the way anyone expected. Instead of being the dutiful son, the charming heir, he took the stage in front of everyone and dropped a bombshell. He revealed a series of documents, all carefully curated, all pointing to the corruption that ran deep within both the Carter and Montgomery empires. The deals, the manipulations, the people who had been used as pawns in a game they never agreed to play. It was all out in the open now. The room went silent, the shock evident on every face. Robert Montgomery's expression was one of disbelief, while Eleanor's eyes blazed with fury. But Lucas didn't stop. He didn't flinch. He stood there in front of everyone, exposing the very foundation of their family's power. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood at his side. This was the moment they had fought for, the moment they had risked everything. And as the room erupted in chaos, Sophia realized something profound. This wasn't just about their families. It was about freedom. It was about rewriting their own futures. Eleanor stormed toward them, her face a mask of fury, but Sophia didn't flinch. She was no longer the girl who had cowered in fear. She was the woman who had taken control of her own destiny, who had fought for the life she deserved. And as Eleanor's wrath descended upon them, Sophia felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. She was ready for whatever came next. The battle had only just begun. The aftermath of Lucas's dramatic reveal at the gala was nothing short of chaos. The Montgomery and Carter families were reeling from the shock, their carefully constructed facades crumbling before their eyes. Sophia stood beside Lucas, her heart pounding, as the room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Whispers spread like wildfire, with people questioning the legitimacy of the family's business dealings, the very foundation of their wealth and power. The carefully curated image of two powerful dynasties, intertwined by marriage and mutual benefit, was now in tatters. It was exactly what Lucas had hoped for, but Sophia couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The world as they knew it was changing. The documents Lucas had revealed, meticulously gathered over weeks of quiet surveillance, painted a picture of corruption, exploitation, and manipulation, a portrait of the very families they had grown up in. For so long, Sophia had been bound by her mother's unyielding expectations, trapped in a gilded cage of privilege. But now, for the first time, she could see a glimmer of freedom, the possibility of a life without the chains that had held her captive for so long. Lucas had always been the mastermind, the one with the vision and the strategy. He had known how to play the game, how to exploit the weaknesses of both families to their advantage. But for Sophia, this was a revelation. A wake-up call that her entire life had been built on lies. The shock of it all was still settling in, but one thing was certain. There was no going back. They'd crossed a line, and now they had to face the consequences. As the commotion in the room grew louder, Eleanor's icy gaze locked onto Sophia. Her mother's eyes, once filled with calculated control, now burned with fury. Sophia could feel the weight of her stare, the accusation in it, but she refused to flinch. She had long been the perfect daughter, obedient and docile, but that version of herself was no longer who she was. She was no longer just a pawn in her mother's game. She was taking control of her life, and nothing was going to stop her. "Do you realize what you've done?" Eleanor's voice was low, dangerous, and it sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "You've ruined everything. Do you think they'll forgive this?" Sophia met her mother's gaze, unyielding. "I didn't ruin anything, Mother. I've finally seen the truth. All the lies, all the manipulation. It's over. I won't be part of this any longer." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, her fury palpable. "You've betrayed us. You've betrayed everything I've built, and you think this will set you free. You think this will set you free? You think Lucas Montgomery will be your savior?" Sophia's heart raced, but she stood firm. She wasn't the naive girl who had blindly followed her mother's commands. She had seen the cracks in the foundation, and now they were starting to break apart. Lucas had helped her see the truth, and no matter how furious Eleanor was, there was no turning back. "I'm not a pawn anymore, Mother," Sophia said, her voice steady though her insides were churning. "I'm making my own choices now." Lucas, who had been standing silently by her side, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't just about you and your empire, Eleanor. It's about the truth. It's about what you've done to people, what both of our families have done. This marriage, this arrangement. It was never about love. It was always about control, and we're done with it." The room fell silent as their words sank in. The gravity of the situation was beginning to dawn on everyone present. The Montgomerys and the Carters were facing a reckoning, and it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. Eleanor's gaze flicked to Robert Montgomery, who had remained quiet until now. He was watching the scene unfold with a look of cold calculation in his eyes. Robert had always been the enforcer of the family's will, the one who made sure things went according to plan. But now, as he surveyed the damage, it was clear that he was just as trapped as everyone else. He had been part of the game for so long that the idea of losing it all was almost unthinkable. "This is treason," Robert said, his voice low but laced with authority. "Both of you will regret this." Lucas met his father's gaze, unflinching. "It's not treason, Father. It's the truth." Sophia could feel the tension between father and son, the years of resentment and rivalry that had simmered beneath the surface finally coming to a head. But this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about them, Sophia and Lucas, taking control of their own lives, rewriting their own future. Eleanor turned to Sophia, her expression hardening. "You've made your choice then. But know this. You will never be part of this family again. I will make sure of it." Sophia's heart tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore, Mother. I'm not asking for anything from you." Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. "We'll make our own way. We'll build something that's ours. Together." Sophia looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. The weight of her family's expectations had been crushing her for so long, but now, with Lucas by her side, she could see a future that was entirely her own. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be sacrifices, but it would be real. It would be theirs. The chaos in the room continued, but Sophia barely registered it. Her mind was focused on the future, on what came next. She and Lucas had started something that couldn't be undone. The families, their power, their wealth. It all felt meaningless now. They had exposed the lies, torn down the facade, and now it was time to rebuild. The fallout from their actions would be monumental, of course. Eleanor would stop at nothing to regain control, and Robert Montgomery would do whatever it took to maintain his empire. There would be legal battles, public scandals, and attempts to discredit them at every turn. But Sophia and Lucas had already taken the first step. They had broken free from the chains that had bound them for so long, and there was no turning back now. As they left the gala, their family still in turmoil behind them, Lucas turned to Sophia, his gaze softer now. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia nodded, her heart steady. "I've never been more ready." The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in her life, Sophia felt like she was in control. They were no longer living in the shadow of their family's expectations. They were writing their own story now, one where they weren't just victims of their circumstances, but the authors of their own destiny. And as they walked away from the crumbling empire that had once defined them, Sophia realized that freedom wasn't just a dream. It was a choice, and she had made hers. The fallout from the gala was swift, but not as immediate as Sophia and Lucas had anticipated. After the shocking revelations, their families were in turmoil, their carefully crafted worlds teetering on the brink of collapse. But in the days following, as the dust began to settle, both Sophia and Lucas understood that the real battle was just beginning. The initial shock had passed, but now they had to face the consequences of their actions, the unraveling of everything they had known, and the intense pressure that would come with their rebellion. Sophia's heart was still racing from the gala. She had never expected the aftermath to be so brutal, but standing at Lucas's side as he exposed the truth felt like a moment of liberation. There was a certain exhilaration in seeing everything her mother had worked for crumble, even if the consequences were uncertain. But as the days passed, she began to realize the magnitude of what they had done. They had not only exposed their family's lies, they had set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. Their future, now more uncertain than ever, was in their hands. Lucas, however, wasn't about to back down. For all the chaos that had followed, he seemed unfazed, as if the weight of the family empire's collapse was nothing compared to the thrill of seeing his plan come to life. He had always been the strategist, the one who saw the game as it was meant to be played. But this was different. This wasn't just about business or power. It was about freedom. And Lucas had made it clear. This was a war, one that, for better or worse, they would fight to the end. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. Every move they made was scrutinized, every word they spoke analyzed by the media and their families. The leaks they had orchestrated, the rumors, the documents, the accusations, had worked. The Montgomerys and the Carters were on the defensive now, scrambling to maintain their power, their reputations. But it was clear they were losing ground. The public was turning against them, and the legal battles were beginning to pile up. But even with all the chaos, one thing was becoming increasingly apparent to both Lucas and Sophia. The game had changed, and now they were the ones in control. Still, the cost of their actions was steep. Eleanor had not given up. Far from it. In fact, she had become more ruthless in her pursuit to regain control of the situation. She had always been a woman who could play the long game, and now, in the wake of the revelations, her strategy was clear. She would do whatever it took to break Sophia. She would use the family's wealth, its influence, its connections, to isolate her daughter, to make sure she was trapped in a corner from which there was no escape. The legal team was mobilized. They were prepared for a long, drawn-out battle in court, one that would strip away Sophia's assets, her freedom, and her connections, forcing her to capitulate to the family's demands. But Lucas wasn't the type to be intimidated. He had never been, even in the face of everything falling apart. He remained calm, focused, ready to fight back with a strategy that was as bold as it was calculated. "They'll come for us, but we won't go down without a fight," he told Sophia, his voice steady, as they met in their private office, away from the chaos of their families and the public scrutiny. "We've already shaken their foundations. Now it's time to finish the job." Sophia stood by the window, looking out over the city, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had never imagined her life would come to this. To be at war with her own family, to be caught in a fight for control of her future, of her identity. But she wasn't scared anymore. If anything, she was empowered. Lucas had given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing: the chance to rewrite her own story. She wasn't just a daughter, an heir, a pawn in someone else's game. She was a player, and the game had changed. But it wasn't just about her. This fight was about them, about the two of them, and what they could build together. It was about breaking free from the chains of family expectations, from the cold, controlling grip of her mother, from the oppressive weight of tradition. They were both standing on the precipice of something monumental, and though the path ahead was unclear, there was no going back. Eleanor, meanwhile, was not one to be easily deterred. She had spent her life building an empire, ensuring that everything and everyone fell in line with her vision, and she wasn't about to let a daughter she had invested so much in, a daughter she had groomed for this exact moment, slip away without a fight. Behind closed doors, she was working furiously, using every resource at her disposal to isolate Sophia from Lucas, to manipulate the narrative, to regain control of the family business and her daughter's future. The battle was now personal. Eleanor's pride was on the line. Sophia knew her mother's tactics all too well. Eleanor would try to divide them, to exploit any weakness she could find. The first move was subtle. She began to turn Sophia's siblings against her. They had always been loyal to their mother, and now, with Eleanor's manipulative words echoing in their ears, they began to view Sophia with suspicion. They called her a traitor, someone who had betrayed everything they stood for. But Sophia refused to be swayed. She had spent too many years living for other people's expectations. It was time to fight for her own future, even if that meant going against everything her family had built. Lucas stood by her side through it all. As the attacks on their relationship escalated, he became more steadfast, more resolute in his commitment to their cause. "We're doing this together," he reminded her, more than once, his voice unwavering. "You're not alone in this fight." And she wasn't. For the first time in years, Sophia felt the strength of partnership, the power of shared vision, and the deep connection they had forged in the face of adversity. This wasn't just about a marriage. It was about a rebellion, a chance to create a life on their own terms. The pressure mounted as the legal battles began. Eleanor, Robert, and the rest of the Montgomery family poured resources into regaining control of the narrative. They hired the best lawyers money could buy, and soon the courtroom became their battlefield. Every day, there were new accusations, new attempts to tear them apart. The Montgomerys accused Lucas of orchestrating the entire plot to ruin his own family, while Eleanor painted Sophia as a traitor to the legacy she had worked so hard to build. But Sophia and Lucas didn't back down. Instead, they went on the offensive. They fought fire, using their own resources, their own legal team, to expose the lies that had been buried for so long. They took the fight to the media, revealing documents, making public statements, turning the very weapons that had once been used to control them back on their families. It was a battle of wills, a war of attrition, and they were determined to win. In the midst of it all, as the family empires crumbled around them, something unexpected happened. Their alliance, their shared struggle, forged a bond between Sophia and Lucas that neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't just about escaping their families anymore. It was about building something new, something real. They weren't just fighting for freedom. They were fighting for each other. As the weeks turned into months, the pressure finally began to take its toll on both families. The media frenzy, the legal battles, the public fallout. It all began to erode their once impenetrable facades. The Montgomerys and the Carters were losing their grip on power. People began to question everything. The whispers that had started as rumors were now becoming undeniable truths. And in the end, it was clear. They had won. Lucas and Sophia stood together, watching as the final pieces of the empire fell away. They had done it. They had exposed the lies, fought the battles, and reclaimed their futures. It hadn't been easy, and it had cost them everything they had known. But as they stood side by side, the weight of their struggle behind them, there was only one thing left to do. They would build something of their own. Together, the final months of their battle felt like a slow, inevitable march toward the unknown. Every day, it seemed, new complications arose, pushing Lucas and Sophia deeper into the heart of a war they had started with only their hearts as armor. They had torn down their families' empires, exposed the darkness lurking beneath the polished exterior, and thrown everything they knew into turmoil. But now, as the dust settled and their families' legacies began to crumble, the question loomed large. What came next? Sophia could feel the weight of everything they had done, the sacrifices they had made, pressing heavily on her chest. She and Lucas had fought tooth and nail to break free from the suffocating grip of their families. But as the last remnants of the battle faded, and the realization that they had won began to sink in, a new challenge emerged, one that neither of them had anticipated. They were no longer just the children of the Montgomery and Carter families. They were no longer heirs, expected to follow the script written for them. They had forged their own path. Yes, but what now? How did they move forward from the destruction they had caused? They had burned the bridges that once connected them to their old lives, and now they had to build new ones. Lucas was the first to break the silence between them as they sat together in his private study, the room filled with papers, legal documents, and remnants of their past lives. His face, usually so composed, showed signs of wear. His brow furrowed, his brow furrowed, his brow furrowed, his hands restless, but his voice was steady. "We've won, Sophia. We've broken free from everything we were supposed to be. But now, we need to decide what we're going to do with this freedom." Sophia sat across from him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had fought so long, so hard, to be free from the suffocating expectations of her family. But now, as she looked at the scattered papers in front of her, the remnants of their rebellion, the shattered empires of both families, she realized that freedom, as exhilarating as it was, came with its own set of challenges. "I've never been free before," she admitted, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. "I don't even know what it looks like. I thought that once we broke away, everything would just fall into place. But it hasn't. I don't know where to go from here." Lucas nodded, understanding all too well the gravity of her words. He, too, had been living in a world where he was expected to fit a mold, to live up to a family legacy that was bigger than himself. The idea of carving out their own future was a double-edged sword. It meant freedom, yes, but it also meant that they had to create something from nothing, a daunting task after everything they had destroyed. "I know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We can't just keep running away from our past, but we don't have to be bound by it either. We have a choice now that neither of us has ever had before. We can rebuild Sophia from the ground up together." The idea of rebuilding, a life not dictated by the suffocating expectations of her mother, not governed by the hidden rules of wealth and power, was an appealing one. But at the same time, it terrified her. They had both been so focused on the fight, so determined to tear down everything that held them captive, that neither of them had truly stopped to think about what they wanted next. What did a future look like for them now? What could they possibly create in the wreckage of their family's legacies? Sophia took a deep breath, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. What do we even build? Everything I've known. Everything I've been taught. Everything I've been taught. It's gone. How do we find our way forward when we've destroyed everything that ever held us together? Lucas's eyes softened as he reached across the desk, his hand gently resting on hers. His touch, so steady and warm, grounded her in the midst of her swirling doubts. We build something new, he said, his voice unwavering. Something that's ours, not theirs. We have to leave behind the things that made us feel small, that made us feel like we were never enough. We have to be our own people now, Sophia. And I think we can do that. Sophia looked at him, her heart catching in her chest. His words were like a lifeline, pulling her from the uncertainty that had been holding her back. She had always been someone's daughter, someone's pawn, but now, for the first time, she could see a glimmer of what it would mean to be truly free. The possibilities were endless. Together, she and Lucas could create a life that wasn't bound by the past, a future that wasn't downed by the past, a future that wasn't tethered to their family's legacy. But the road ahead would not be easy. They had made enemies of the people who had once been their families, their allies. Eleanor's fury was boundless, and Robert Montgomery was no less ruthless. The battle for their freedom had come at a cost, and that cost was far from over. Their families would never let them go without a fight. But as Sophia sat there with Lucas beside her, something inside her clicked. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living on their own terms, about creating something meaningful out of the ashes they had left behind. They would start small. They didn't need to rebuild their families' empires. They didn't need the wealth, the power, or the influence that had once defined them. What they needed was a chance to be themselves, to live without fear of their mother's expectations, without the crushing weight of legacy on their shoulders. They needed to forge their own path, to create something built on their own values, something that would outlast the ruins of their families' names. "We'll build something that matters," Lucas said, his voice filled with conviction. "Something that makes a difference. We'll do it our way." Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in weeks. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but one of hope. Hope for the future. Hope for the life they could create together. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. And so, with the weight of their pasts behind them, they began to build. They didn't know exactly what it would look like. Perhaps it would be a business, or a charity, or something entirely new. But one thing was certain: it would be their creation, their legacy. They would take the lessons they had learned from their families, the pain they had endured, and use it to fuel something bigger than themselves, something that mattered. As they stepped forward, hand in hand, into the unknown, Sophia realized that the future was never a guarantee. It was something you built, piece by piece, day by day. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to create it. Together with Lucas, they would carve out a life that wasn't dictated by the past, but by their own vision. A life that would be their own. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The story of Sophia and Lucas is a powerful reminder that true freedom comes not from escaping our past, but from taking control of our future. It teaches us that breaking free from the constraints imposed on us, whether by family, society, or tradition, requires immense courage, sacrifice, and determination. Yet the most valuable lesson is that once we choose to rewrite our own narrative, we become the architects of our destiny. The road to independence is never easy, and it often comes with unexpected challenges. But in the end, it's our choices, our resilience, and our willingness to fight for what truly matters that define who we become. Sophia and Lucas didn't just tear down the empire that held them captive. They rebuilt their lives, piece by piece, based on their values and vision. They showed us that the courage to change, to challenge the status quo, is often the first step toward creating something meaningful. The most significant thing we can do in life is to make choices that reflect who we truly are, not who others want us to be. What lesson did you take away from their journey? Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your country in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping and inspiring tales like this one. See you in the next video.